Video games are one of the most interesting forms of media, as it's one of the only forms of media that the consumer can directly interact with. Whether that be a well-written story that gives the player the opportunity to change the overall narrative, to giving players the choice of whatever elemental spell they wish to use to destroy every living being around them, the amount of control that the player gets in this form of entertainment is almost... Hey, my eyes are up here, douchebag. Do you think I grew the... Oh yeah, I forgot I'm no longer in the VR realm where I can live out my dreams as a big-breasted anime waifu. For some, the freedom of choice provided in conventional video games just isn't enough, leading some people to discover the amazing world of virtual reality gaming. Virtual reality has been a point of cultural fascination since the 90s, with absolute gems like Saban's VR Troopers and Nintendo's Virtual Boy. I wipe my ass on these stupid-ass poo-poo pieces of shit. So yeah, unfortunately VR became a laughingstock due to its incredibly ambitious nature. The concept of a super immersive gaming experience wasn't unrealistic, but it almost never ends well when the hype ends up outweighing the technological capabilities of the concept being hyped. In its current state, it's hard to recommend VR gaming to the average Joe as it requires fairly expensive hardware for not a lot of quality software. I tend to split VR experiences into two categories: scare your grandma experiences and actual VR experiences. I wrote the script at like 3 AM, just cut me a fucking break, dude. The scare your grandma experiences are pretty self-explanatory and sadly make up the vast majority of VR experiences. These are your run-of-the-mill experiences like a small horror video or that thing where you walk on a plank and it's like over a building and it's like really fucking scary. You pass over your Google Cardboard to Aunt Sheila at your family gathering to show them how cool VR is, but because boomers have no fucking grasp of modern technology, it usually ends in one of your family members diving into your TV, running into the wall, or accidentally concussing one of the kids that happens to be running around in the play area. This will usually result in a couple of chuckles from other family members, maybe tears from the kid that got smacked in the face by a controller, but this isn't really hooking people into VR because they're not seeing the true potential of it. This is where I believe people would be better convinced with the actual VR experiences. It's also pretty self-explanatory if you couldn't tell already. These experiences take full advantage of the immersive environments and physics of VR and design games that revolve around these two concepts. Unfortunately, these types of games are really hard to make, which means that these experiences are few and far between. The first game to really get me hooked into VR was Blade and Sorcery with its physics-based combat system and really cool magic system. After that, I played a bit of Pavlov and some other VR first-person shooters, but there was one game that stood out to me as essentially the Half-Life 2 of VR. And no, it's not Half-Life Alyx. That game is awesome, but you know, this is not that game. A game that provided an interactive environment with physics that was seldom seen in other games at the time. A game that put the power into the hands of the player and left them to their own devices without holding their hand. This is Bonelab. Making a sequel to a smash hit is no easy task, and that's doubly true for a VR game where the hardware is still considered to be in its infancy. Bonelab is essentially just more Boneworks. And that's fucking awesome. The game is essentially a physics sandbox in disguise as an action-adventure platformer. Its focus is entirely on physics, whereas the shooting, the platforming, the jumping, and all that stuff is kind of more so something on the side. You're not this ghost with two disembodied hands that can run into walls and interact with the environment in really unrealistic ways. You had this fully rendered 3D body that abided by the same laws of physics as that crate you're jumping on top of. You're not able to grab a sledgehammer with one hand and this game and swinging around like crazy because sledgehammers are realistically heavy. What you can do is use these physics to your advantage, like grabbing a crowbar and using that to extend your reach during a jump so you can skip certain puzzles. It completely rewires your little gamer brain and gives you the opportunity to break the limits of conventional video game logic. And the game is entirely self-aware of this, as that's essentially the main point of the story. Obvious spoilers here, but the story of Bonelab is in the same vein as Boneworks, where the general idea revolves around killing your physical self to achieve virtual immortality. Now, Bonelab takes this concept and cranks it up to 11, and it doesn't pull any punches. The game starts with a noose around your neck as you're being publicly executed. Thankfully, a dagger gets spawned out of thin air so you can cut yourself free, but this scene has definitely stuck with many people, and for understandable reasons. There's a number of people that at least want a trigger warning, and at most want the scene completely skippable or removed entirely. I agree with maybe adding a trigger warning, but I do believe that this scene is important to the story as it makes later campaign levels way more impactful and philosophical. I'll explain more later, just bear with me on this one. So after your traumatic experience, the game runs you through the basics of equipping items to the inventory slots you have over your shoulders and under your arms. It shows you basic physics puzzles, platforming, combat, all that good shit. Then the game opens up into the lab, which is basically the hub area. Here you can access a wide variety of experiences, from parkour obstacle courses to combat time attack trials to a wave-based survival game mode to even some wacky shit like bowling and some sandbox environments. The game heavily encourages you to try all of these experiences at least once, as this is how you can unlock the puzzle to complete the rest of the game. The next part of the story takes you through some physics-based puzzles and some action set pieces, and it's at this point that you notice how fucking awesome the platforming and gunplay feels. Many parts of the environment are grabbable, including the ledges you can jump up to. Your character can charge a jump and get some decent height out of it, but if you crouch down in real life while you charge your jump and pretend you are actually jumping, the increased force will give you a boost to your jump height, which not only increases immersion, but also feels way more rewarding to pull off an insanely high jump because you had to physically exert yourself to accomplish that. While we're on the subject of immersion, let's talk about the gunplay. I grew up in the deep south, so I've been around guns my entire life. And after all of the experience that I've had with handgun shooting, it is so fucking fascinating to see how so many aspects of real life shooting will bleed into VR gaming. So if you're shooting a semi-automatic firearm or single fire, if you're unfamiliar with guns, you generally ease in on the trigger until you feel a bit of resistance, commonly referred to as the wall. Once you apply more pressure and pull the trigger past the wall, the gun will go bang and will not go bang again until you ease off the trigger enough to hear a faint click, indicating that the trigger has been reset and can be fired again. Every handgun has different triggers with different wall stages and different reset stages, so they're important factors to consider when choosing your personal handgun. Interestingly enough, these handgun fundamentals actually translate to Bonelab to a certain degree. The trigger on your motion controller will actually vibrate, indicating your handgun's wall and reset stages. This is very useful, as not only does it allow you to shoot a lot quicker, but it also allows you to shoot much more accurately, as this also can segue into trigger control. After a round is fired and the trigger resets, it's usually a good idea to immediately return to the wall instead of completely letting go of the trigger, because a second shot would then require easing in on the trigger again, finding the wall, and then firing another round. Easing in on the trigger is also super important, as precise shots rely more heavily on a smooth trigger pull instead of a harsh yank of the trigger. Slapping the trigger can create directional pressure on your handgun, which will more often than not cause your groupings to go lower left if you're right-handed. This can also be seen in Bonelab, but this is really just a general thing with all VR shooters, as slapping the trigger on your motion controller can produce the same effect regardless of what VR shooter you're playing. Not only that, but by using guns in VR, I learned that I'm cross-eye dominant, which means that I'm right-handed but I use my left eye to align my sights, so that's probably why the footage that you're seeing here probably looks a little wonky. It's cool to see this stuff have an actual impact in VR, as literally all of this is irrelevant when we're talking about an FPS like Call of Duty, where your character will constantly pull a trigger at a consistent velocity. It provides many more factors to consider when taking your shots and makes for a much more immersive experience. What I also find unique is that the rifles have different grab points, so you can use a variety of grips. Of course, you have the standard grip, your vertical and angular foregrips. Those with small arms may want to try the magwell grip. You have whatever the fuck this grip is. Wait, you can't do that. You have to press the mag release, dude. You can't just rip it out of it like that. What the fuck? Dude, what are you doing, dude? You can't fucking hold it like that. It's 45 ACP. You're not going to get stable shots out of that, dude. Stop. Stop grabbing the muzzle, dude, you're gonna burn her hand. Stop! So yeah, you have a lot of choices as to how you wish to use your equipment in this game. All of what I showed you is stuff that you could previously experience in Boneworks, but Bonelab throws a curveball into the situation with the newly added avatar mechanic. In Boneworks, you played as a VR body of one guy who had a set height, weight, arm strength, leg strength, etc. But Bonelab allows you to change into an avatar with differing stats. For example, you can change to a more nimble character who can speed past obstacle courses and jump higher than the other avatars, or if you want to climb platforming sections with ease and completely bypass certain puzzles, you can use the tall avatar. The heavy and strong avatars are good for punching the shit out of things and throwing them into orbit. The short avatar provides an accurate feeling of what it feels like to be under 6 feet tall and the eyes of a basic white girl, and the anime avatar provides an accurate feeling of what it feels like to have breasts. There will be an avatar for every type of playstyle, but you can always add more avatars to the game as Bonelab is made exclusively with modding in mind. The modding SDK is only in beta, but that hasn't stopped modders from going crazy with modding stuff into the game. I never knew I needed to smack NPCs around the map as a giant gorilla, but thank God this game has provided that for me. It's insane how dedicated this community is to make free mods for a newly released VR game, and all of this is free and it comes at no cost, except for your stomach. I'm fairly experienced with VR, but this game makes me want to puke. When you're standing in the middle of your room and you're using motion controllers to control the steering wheel of a go-kart while you're an anime demon maid, speeding through a racetrack while you have Eurobeat blaring in your ears, it will make for a complete sensory overload that will weaken the stomachs of any hit. Thank you. I definitely wouldn't recommend this game to people who are new to VR just from the sheer amount of crazy shit you can experience like driving, flying, riding a roller coaster. But if you don't suffer from any type of motion sickness, then you might like how the game presents so many options to you. That's where most of the magic comes from with this game, the amount of player choice. I see a lot of players who have posted threads on Reddit and the Steam community forums essentially asking the same two questions. Was I supposed to do this? And did I do this correctly? The answer is simple, yes. And also no. I think people are viewing this game from a very conventional video game standpoint. They want to be told exactly what to do so they can blaze through the story and be rewarded with a cutscene or exposition, and then they'll move on to the next game where they experience the same thing. What they don't realize though is that the VR space that's been given to us is so open-ended that there are no right or wrong ways to complete a puzzle or a combat encounter. But for the most part, you're limited to your own creativity. I'll show you an example of what I mean. After opening the quarantine door and finishing the action sequences, I was met with this large room with a puzzle. What you're meant to do is hop on this one moving platform and use your hands to push the wall until the platform makes it past an obstruction, causing the ramp to fall down so you can cross safely. Problem is, I think I fucked up by pushing the ramp instead of the wall, causing the ramp to get stuck inside of the obstruction. This is likely a collision bug or something, and usually this would require a reset or maybe opening up the developer console to no-clip into the other side, but since this was in a VR environment, I wasn't going to let that stop me. I remember this one hook item I used at the bottom of the puzzle to drag another platform to the other side of the room. So I grabbed that, made my way to the glitched out ramp, and hooked onto the protruding beam and was able to swing over to the other side with a well-calculated jump. Now, was I supposed to do that? Probably not. But let me tell you, that was way more fucking satisfying. This game is very special to me as it essentially hands you the tools to break down its walls and it asks you to break them. That crowbar isn't just a melee weapon that you use to smack around nobodies with. That's a tool. I mentioned before about how you can use a crowbar to extend your jump, but you can even use this thing to pry open the quarantine door to completely bypass that puzzle at the beginning of the game. This isn't even an exploit, as while you're playing the game, there's this one guy that talks to you through these radios scattered throughout the levels, who explains that the player's ability to manipulate the VR environment around them and break the rules is not only canon, but is flat out encouraged.
The question is, what are you actually capable of doing? And what if there's a place where the limits you put on yourself here don't exist, where literally anything is possible? Stop playing the game how it's meant to be played. Look for anomalies. Look for breaks. Test the limits. You'll find your way.
The fact of the matter is, in virtual reality, there is no limits to what we can do. We can be anywhere, anytime, any place, and it's really, that's the issue. It's total escapism.
That execution at the beginning, that wasn't implemented just for shits and giggles. Those people saw you as an outcast, and they didn't realize your true potential, and neither did you. Unless you played Boneworks, of course, in which case you'd probably be more familiar with this, but You get my point. You were just another player, desperate to be pigeonholed into the same cookie-cutter gaming experience. But once you gain exponentially more powerful, the ability to change your body on the fly, then they will see what they couldn't destroy when you run into them later in the game. You make those fuckers pay. Then, after the dust settles, after the thoughts of these virtual bodies, constructed from lines of code screaming for help, subsides, you look down on these two hands that aren't even your own real hands, and you wonder, can we be given too much power? Those NPCs hanging you were sentient beings. Maybe they were executing you because they were scared of you. What if it's really a good thing that we're coaxed into a more simplified gaming environment because we too are scared of what we'd become if we were given more power than we already had? What if by indulging our desire for power and an environment where our actions don't have consequences, we had become the very same monsters who wronged us at the beginning without even realizing it? What if none of this matters anyway because none of this is real? The only thing we know now is that we're no longer just players with this game. We have broken the limits of conventional gaming and are now left to our own devices to create our own fun. So you know what? Go out there and create your fun. And don't let people tell you what you can do. And for the love of God, stop playing with your titties and the fucking mirror!